Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on the latest edition of The Pulse with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm pleased to be joined this time by my friend for the last 4 years now, Brady Hess, current law student at Elon, longtime Virginia Tech fan. Brady, thank you so much for joining us. The pride of Richlands as well. I got to add that in.
Appreciate it, Billy. Always good to see you. It's been a while, and looking forward to talking with you, man.
For sure. So let's get started right here. I'm going to start with a basic question. It's a very open-ended question, but who is Brady Hess?
Brady Hess, a guy born and raised in Richlands, Virginia, right in the heart of Appalachia, really blue-collar area. Lived small town USA, Friday Night Lights, Varsity Blues sort of thing. Loved Virginia Tech growing up, had a wonderful opportunity to attend college there and graduate there. Then came back home for a year and kind of just figured it out a little bit. And then went off to law school down at Elon in Greensboro. But Brady Hess, somebody who loves his family, very faithful to the Lord, a hard worker, I hope most people would say, and a Hokie. So that's what I'd say about Brady Hess, just hopefully somebody that everybody likes for the most part.
Completely concur with everything Brady said there. He's one of the most likable guys out there. Brady, you mentioned your association with Virginia Tech. I know your family, big Hokie family. So just talk to us about kind of how that association started, and you've been a Virginia Tech fan for as long as you can remember.
Yeah, the only thing I've ever known was maroon and orange. My dad and his brother both attended Virginia Tech, had season football tickets for years. My dad's missed one home football game at Virginia Tech since 1979. His brother ultimately passed away in 2006 after a short bout with skin cancer, but Dad's kept the tradition going with me. He took me in 2002, still kind of upset I never got to see Mike Vick and the Hokies when I was about 3 or 4 years old, but I guess we can live and forgive a little bit. But myself, I've not missed a Tech home football game since 2006. So, you hear Marty Smith talk about it on ESPN. He's from Parisburg, which is a little bit closer to Blacksburg than what Richlands is, but Virginia Tech athletics was basically, that was our pro team. If you were from my end of the state, DC's 6 hours away. Cincinnati got the Reds and the Bengals. That's about 5.5. Atlanta 5.5. The Braves, the Falcons, so on and so forth. So Virginia Tech, not only a great academic institution, but as far as athletics are concerned, that was the big thing. If you were from Southwest Virginia, especially, I tell people all the time that the Battle at Bristol was kind of like a dream for somebody in my neck of the woods. Tennessee, the University of Tennessee, about 3 hours from home. Virginia Tech, about an hour and 45 minutes from home. But everybody always talked about how cool it would be if those two teams got together and played at Bristol Motor Speedway, and that happened, luckily, while I was at Virginia Tech. So that was really cool. But Virginia Tech, really, I think, synonymous with Southwest Virginia, and a lot of comparison to that lunch pail, coal mining region, blue-collar region, hardworking people, and a lot of things that were symbolic and synonymous with Bud Foster's lunch pail. But Virginia Tech always been very special to me. Never wanted to go to college anywhere else. I applied to Tech in Radford. Radford, the only reason I applied there was because it was so close to Virginia Tech. If I wouldn't have got into Tech, I probably would have just went to community college and then tried again. But thankfully, we don't have to realize or see what would have happened there, because the first time was a charm there, and it was a dream come true. And I miss Blacksburg every day. Luckily, still able to get back quite a bit, but Blacksburg is always going to be home away from home for me.
Yeah, and for sure. And I wanted to tell people, no disrespect to other people I know like Bailey Angle or Nolan Knight or Evan Hughes or David Cunningham or any of those guys. I don't think I know a single person who loves Virginia Tech more than Brady Hess. So I did want to give you a shout out for that. And by the way, Brady, you talk about all the home games you've been to. That doesn't just stop you right there. I mean, you go on the road to see the Hokies. You've gone to bowl games. Do you know roughly how many road games, how many bowl games you've been able to go to?
I know bowl games just off the top of my head. I've been to the past 4. I've been to the Belk Bowl, the Camping World Bowl, the Belk Bowl again, and then the Military Bowl. Away trips, I've been to Notre Dame, UVA, ECU, Pitt, UNC, Duke. And I didn't go to any away games or bowl games until I actually went to Virginia Tech and was a student there. And the first few years I didn't go, but then I got a little bit more reliable vehicle. The 92 Ranger, didn't trust it too much to go on some long trips, but I'd say it's in the teens. However, away games I've been to for football anyway. I've been on a few basketball trips as well, but I've actually got it on my phone. I might have to pick it up while we're on this interview, how many Tech football games and basketball games I've been to. So it's definitely not been a shortage, and that's been a pretty cool experience throughout my entire life.
Best game you've attended at Lane Stadium, if you had to pick one.
Best game I've ever attended at Lane Stadium. Oh, man, that's tough. So many good ones come to mind. That 09 Nebraska game's hard to beat. 04 West Virginia comes to mind. 2011 Miami comes to mind. This past year, 2019 UNC in 6 overtimes comes to mind. And I probably would say that 6 overtime UNC game. I mean, people may say recency bias, but I mean, there's not very many 6 overtime games in football at any level, and that was a lot of fun to be a part of, and it kept you on the edge of your seat. You didn't know what was going to happen next. Blocked field goals. I mean, it was unbelievable. It was a really cool game, and happy that I had to be there. So I'd say either that or the 09 Nebraska Tyrod did it, Mikey. Everybody knows what happened there. But a lot of special memories. It's hard to pinpoint one, but I'd probably go with 19 UNC or 09 Nebraska if I had to pick one.
And for those who don't remember, I mean, that 6 overtime game was an incredible game, like Brady mentioned. And that game, too, was, you talk about Coastal Division and really helped Virginia Tech. I mean, everyone remembers that Duke Friday night loss earlier in the year, a blowout loss. That UNC game really helped turn the season around for Virginia Tech. Brady, I wanted to ask you, kind of to flip the question, what about the worst game you've seen as a Virginia Tech fan?
A lot more easy to pick than the best game, without a doubt. 2007 Boston College on a Thursday night in the rain. Talk about being a dejected 11-year-old. The Hokies are about to beat number 2 in the country. Would have been only the second time in program history they beat somebody in the top 5. It's pouring the rain, and they are doing everything that they can for 58 minutes. And Matt Ryan leads a great comeback and wins 14-10 in regulation. I've still yet not seen something like that. Hopefully I'm on the better end of that next time. But pouring rain, big game. It was just a heartbreaker. I still remember it very well.
How about what's the most anticipated opponent? Because, even during my time at Virginia Tech as a student, I mean, we've gotten to see and you've certainly overlapped with that. We saw Ohio State come in, Clemson, both defending champions, Notre Dame come in. You obviously have more experience with, seeing highly anticipated teams come in. Is there one team that you think of that, when they were coming to Blacksburg, you thought, all right, this is probably the most hyped up, anticipated game I can remember as a Virginia Tech fan?
Oh, man, that's another one. I think probably the most highly anticipated game that I can remember. I was younger. The Hokies played Miami in 2005. It was number 3 versus number 5. I think that I want to think Tech was 3rd and Miami was 5th. Game day was there, but that was a big-time game. It was primetime ESPN. College Game Day was there, and the Hokies ended up, unfortunately, laying an egg. But it was a big-time game, that's for sure. I look back at it, and I hope days are not far away from 2 top 5 teams entering that place again. But you look back at those early 2000s, and I would probably, in my experience that I've been a part of, I'd probably say it was that Miami and Tech game in '05.
How about the best player you've seen on the field? Whether it's a Virginia Tech player, whether it's someone that came to town in Blacksburg. I know you mentioned Matt Ryan earlier. If you had to pick one player, you say so far, man, that's the best player I've seen play Virginia Tech or was on the team. Who would you pick?
There's so many good players, and you sit back and you think about it. And I mean, I didn't get to go to this game, but I mean, arguably the greatest college football team ever came to Lane Stadium in 2001, the Miami Hurricanes. You look at that team, so many all pros, all Americans, Super Bowl winners, but I didn't get to see that team. That was a little bit before Dad started taking me to games. But I mean, when you think about Tech, I mean, you think about Tyrod Taylor, you think about Ryan Williams. Oh man, you think about so many good players: D'Angelo Hall, Xavier Adebe, Daryl Tapp, and then for opposing teams that I've seen, I mean, C.J. Spiller come through, Ezekiel Elliott, Braxton Miller still got everybody on a spin cycle. Oh man, so many good players. It's just hard to name them. Sean Taylor. The list goes on and on. I know I'm missing so many, but man, there have been a lot of good players to come through there as an opponent. I mean, Duke Johnson ran all over the Hokies my freshman year. Man, I know I'm leaving some out. Pac-Man Jones, man, I remember on the way home from Tech games, a little side note is we get to about Princeton, West Virginia on the way home from Blacksburg back to Richlands, and you could pick up the West Virginia games, and after you got done listening to Bill and Mike in the post game, you could turn it over to J104.5, and it seemed like Pac-Man Jones was at West Virginia for 100 years. But Pac-Man was there, part of that '04 team. Just so many good players. Pat White at West Virginia. The list goes on and on. I was not in attendance when Larry Fitzgerald came through town, but I mean, there have been so many good players. Brett Favre played there as a part of Southern Miss, but in my time, I mean, there's been a lot of good ones. But I mean, that Michael Thomas on that Ohio State team. I mean, it's crazy just in recent years how good players have been. Aaron Donald, Pittsburgh. I mean, so many good players have came through there.
And speaking of which, I mean, you've had the opportunity to you were able to provide a lot of perspective and history on the Virginia Tech teams. How about favorite, or not favorite player, but most, because I know you've also met a bunch of these players, at least from the Virginia Tech side. Who's the most famous player you've met? Is it Michael Vick, or if you have met Michael Vick, is there someone else you would say kind of comes close to him?
I have had the pleasure. I met Michael in 2010 at an autograph session, but I also had the pleasure to interview him during my time at WUVT. And Vic is my favorite athlete ever, regardless of the Virginia Tech affiliation. I mean, he was so exciting to watch, and he, without a doubt, is my favorite. But I mean, if you had to go separate from Vic, I mean, I other than the time we were at Tech, I've not really met a whole bunch of guys. I mean, I was a part of a Hokie Kids Club and met Ryan Williams. I remember Ryan Williams was very personable. I remember him signing a football for me after the autograph session was over. But some guys with like local ties, really good buddies with Stephen Peoples, good buddies with now Penn State kicker Jordan Stout. A lot of Casey Harmon was a guy that was there. Well, I mean, you were at Tech, Billy, from Southwest Virginia that I'm good buddies with. But, you know, looking back at just like childhood, Michael Vick, Ryan Williams was a favorite of mine, David Wilson, Rob Stanton, Austin Fuller. Those were a couple Richlands guys, those last two guys. But Jimmy Williams was a great corner. Vince Hall and Xavier Adebe. Oh, man, a lot of good players. Cam Chancellor. So it was cool, man. But getting to be in that Hokie Kids Club in those late 2000s when they were winning the ACC, you got to meet a lot of good players, got your picture taken with a lot of good players. So as far as meeting them, other than Vic, Tyrod, Ron Williams, Darren Evans, David Wilson, Eddie Royal, Josh Morgan. It's a long list of just a lot of great talent, but good people as well.
One game I wanted to ask you about, and this by no means is probably the best game you've been to, but certainly in terms of most emotional, not just that you've been to, but in the history of Virginia Tech football, has to be the first game of the football season after the shooting that happened in 2007 against ECU. College game day was there. Just a really emotional setting. What are your memories of that game?
My memories of that game, I was 11 years old, and I remember I went to game day. It was there across from Lane, and I made a sign. They had the poster boards sponsored by Home Depot, and you could fill out whatever you wanted. I made a sign. I don't even remember what it said, but I remember I was so excited to make one. And I remember me and my dad getting a program, and Dad telling me that today is something you're always going to want to remember. This is a very important chapter of Virginia Tech history. I remember the pregame, the video, they released the 32 balloons into the sky. Virginia Tech and East Carolina ran out of the tunnel concurrently. It was just a really emotional scene, and it was a pretty close game. I mean, not a lot of people remember the score. I think it was 17-7, something of that nature, but that wasn't the important part of that day. The important part was just the community's step in that healing process by having that event on campus. And everybody knows that Virginia Tech, probably the most important thing to Virginia Tech, I would arguably say, is the football program. I've seen people in recent years on Twitter make jokes that it's a basketball school, and that's not going to be the case unless something drastically happens. But and that's no disrespect to the basketball team at all, but football is important at Virginia Tech, and that event was such an important part of the healing process. And I'm lucky 13 years later that I got to be there and I got to witness it. It's something I'll never forget.
And now transitioning to sort of the current stages of the team, Virginia Tech coming off of a pretty remarkable season considering the circumstances last year. When started off bad, were able to turn the page and ultimately come within a win of making it to the ACC championship game. A lot of starters returning on defense. You've got another year of Justin Fuente running his offense. Obviously a transition to Justin Hamilton as a defensive coordinator now that longtime coordinator Bud Foster has retired. So, Brady, what are your expectations of the team this season? Hopefully we'll get to play football first and foremost, but if we do you expect them? Do you think they can make the ACC championship game? I mean, what are your expectations for Virginia Tech?
I would absolutely expect Virginia Tech to win the Coastal. A lot of returning players, like you said, a lot of the defense is back. Hendon Hooker's back. Trey Turner's back. Really, what I'd like to see, Billy, is I would really like to see a running game flourish, because we have not seen a running game really flourish at Virginia Tech since the Darren Evanses and the Ryan Williams and the David Wilsons. I mean, Trayvon McMillan had over 1,000 in 2015, and then Gerard Evans was pretty mobile in 2016. But I'd really like to see that running game take off. I know there's a lot of tailbacks in the mix back there. McLeese has departed, but there's some younger guys that can step up to the forefront and make an impact. Some graduate transfers. I'm really excited about Justice Reed from Youngstown State. I think he can make an immediate impact on the defensive line. An original recruit to the SEC before an injury plagued him to play for one of the best FCS programs in the country. But I think he shows some promise. Really excited about that Justin Hamilton hire, because Justin Hamilton from Southwest Virginia, a Clintwood guy over in Dickinson County, 2 counties to my left, was a great player at Virginia Tech. He was there at the peak of the LPD. He was there at the peak of DBU. He's got a blue-collar mentality. Not only does he bring that lunch pail mentality, I think he brings that swagger of DBU in the early 2000s with him, and that's very important. It's something that hasn't been as prominent the last few years, but the Hokies got some good corners. Waller and Farley potentially two of the best in the entire country. Farley on the top of many NFL draft boards is the best DB in next year's draft. Really excited to see what those guys can do. And you wonder if Farley gets to play in that bowl game last year, if that's not a different result. But he's a great player. Really looking forward to the Hokies getting on the football field. I think this year's team has potential to be the best that's been in Blacksburg in quite a while. Other than the 2016 team, it's the best that's been in Blacksburg since 2011, on paper anyway. So hopefully we will see what we want to see.
And speaking of that, you mentioned you think it's one of the better teams that's come out, at least of these last few years. Justin Fuente will be going into his 5th season. If the Hokies do not make it to the AC Championship game, is he on the hot seat? Should he be fired? I know that was the talk last year until the team turned it around.
Yeah, he's definitely not been given a very long leash, it seems. And, it's really kind of crazy because the same people that were not complacent with 10 wins are the same people that are calling for his head. And I just it's year 5. You got to figure it out. His teams have showed signs of hope. I hope that the Hokies can pull it or turn it around. The Hokies got spoiled pretty bad there with Frank Beamer there in the last few years. And I think that this is a telltale sign of what long periods of success can do. If we're sitting around fussing about 8-win seasons, that shows how good of a past that you've had. But nonetheless, I think that the fan base is ready to be hopeful, cement that hope in Fuente. After year 1, it looked great. After year 2, it looked great. And then year 3, you kind of hit a brick wall. You're having to reschedule an extra game to get to a bowl, which is something none of us are used to. And last year, they come out of the gate and they looked pretty bad. And then you put Hooker in the offense and it opened things up. And you played pretty good football. Ultimately, the Commonwealth Cup left town for the first time since the dinosaurs roamed the earth. But I hope that Fuente can turn it around. I think that the fan base is chomping at the bit with recruiting, with wins. It doesn't seem like he's got a lot of wiggle rooms, but I think the noise will, if we thought it was loud before, I think that if this year – expectations are not met, I think that noise will continue to get a little bit louder.
What was your take on the whole Baylor situation with Fuente? Do you buy that he outright turned it down? Because at least for me, and you were obviously the college football expert, I was thinking, Baylor's got better facilities. You can probably recruit better. You think about it, because Lincoln Riley's also been linked to so many NFL jobs. If he leaves, all of a sudden Baylor could be sort of that team that, could overtake Oklahoma in the Big 12. Do you buy that he outright turned it down? What was your kind of take on that whole situation?
My kind of thought on the situation is, Baylor probably is a brighter looking diamond if you're Justin Fuente. You're a Big 12 guy. You're from the Midwest. You get to go back to Texas. I know you're from Oklahoma originally, but you get to go to Texas. But I don't know if I was surprised at all. It looked there like he was going to be the guy for the job. The one takeaway I took from that, and I understand where he's coming from, but I don't think it was a good look for him, is, he was on record as he was courting with that job, and ultimately he says he turned it down. But the very next press conference, if guys go in the transfer portal, we don't want them back. And I don't know, I feel like that's a interesting street to go down after you've been courting with another job, but that's a story, I guess, for another day. But I don't know. It'll be interesting, and that's another thing. If you're Fuente and you hear all these rumblings of how bad you are, and the Hokies have put it back in second gear after it looked like they were in sixth gear in his first year, why would he want to stick around if something comes calling? Baylor, by any means, has not really had a strong football history. RG3, but I remember playing on some NCAA football games as a kid. Baylor wasn't very good. But I think it's got that close to home connection, and I'm sure that he absolutely did tinker with the idea.
For sure. And I guess kind of going off of that, Brady, this is one thing I've discussed with people before. And again, you would have more insight into this, but and I don't remember the stat, but I'm sure you remember. I think when Notre Dame was coming into town, they showed a stat of like Hokies haven't been able to beat a top 5 team or really an elite team at home in quite some time. You would probably have some perspective on the last big win when that happened. And I guess for people like me who may not be as hardcore fans as you, we see kind of this happening. And we're like, all right, Lane Stadium it's got a good enough home field advantage. Virginia Tech, I mean, they're not, some FCS school. You think you can recruit the talent, bring good players in to where if you're at home, you got that atmosphere like Lane Stadium. I mean, you should be able to get some of these wins, maybe be able to knock out a Clemson or a Notre Dame at home every once in a while. Of course, Penn State's coming into town this year. We'll see if fans are even allowed. But what's your take on that? Do you understand the fan frustration there? I mean, don't you feel like, given the situation, Hokie should be able to sort of pull off some of these big wins at Lane?
Yeah, I definitely think that the Hokies should have more than one victory in program history over a top 5 opponent, and that was they beat number 2 Miami in 2003, 31-7 in the pouring rain. And you look back, and that win even gets overcast because Tech went on to lose 4 of its last 5, I believe. So, yeah, that was a big game in Tech history, but what happened after the fact kind of puts it underneath the covers and you forget about it. But you look back at it, Billy, the only ranked team the Hokies beat in the 2010s was Wake Forest this past year.
Yeah.
So it's been a long time since they've had a marquee win there. Lane Stadium has been a hyped up venue. I would say it was more so a more intimidating place to play in the 2000s. It was like Enter Sandman in that 2011 Miami game. Every down, people were losing their minds. They were juiced, ready to just they were on top of you. And I think Lane needs some more big wins. They will come. It's still yet to see, but the Hokies still trying to get over that hump. I mean, with a marquee win like that, I mean, the Ohio State game was at Ohio State when the Hokies won there, but one win against a top 5 team. You look back at some big wins at Lane. West Virginia was 6th in the country, I think, in 2004, but they've not fared well. And I think that just like you're talking about on that podcast or that broadcast against Notre Dame, they need a big win there. And there were no ranked teams that walked out of Blacksburg with a loss until Wake Forest this past year. And that's when the Hokies were really clicking on all cylinders there toward the end. But you got to go if you want to keep a reputation as a feared place to play. There's got to be more than one ranked team going down in 10 years, in my opinion. And biased, hard place to play. The entrance is the greatest in all of college football, but to continue having a reputation as a feared place to play, you got to knock off some big teams. Yeah, you can beat who you're supposed to beat, but unless you got Dabo and the gang shaking in their boots when they come in there, you got to knock those guys off a few more times to keep that reputation. And while I still think that reputation exists, I think it becomes solidified when you're knocking off ranked opponents regularly.
Sticking to that topic in a similar vein, I wanted to talk about fan engagement, Brady, because I think this is always interesting whenever you and I talk. I think we're kind of different in a lot of ways, but one way I would say we're different is that, you grew up, eating, breathing, living Virginia Tech, whereas I, being from the northern part of the state, and I'm sure there's people that are not like me that are from the northern part of the state, but, I wasn't a Virginia Tech fan, until really I came to Tech, and obviously I got involved and that changed. This is something Bill Roth and I have talked about before, but there's just, I feel like not as many people like you anymore that, grew up Virginia Tech. And, people talked about last year with fans leaving at halftime, fans leaving when the game was already over. That was a big topic of discussion, especially at Lane Stadium. Do you think that's the case, that fan engagement has gone down over the years? Now, granted, the team, I think, has something to do with that. But do you think Virginia Tech has the same fan base it once did when you were growing up and going to Lane Stadium?
Billy, this is something I actually really think about quite a bit. And me and Bill had a conversation one time when we went on a field trip for class to WVVA in Bluefield, and we're driving through Giles County, and Bill looked at me and he said, "Do you feel like we still reach to these people?" And that's a hard question. I mean, there are a lot of people from my hometown that like Virginia Tech who've never been to Virginia Tech. There's a lot of people who liked Virginia Tech when they were playing Richmond and William and Mary and East Tennessee State, and they would go to games, and they were there for this bad years and the good years, and they were there in the early 2000s and the 99s. And there's a lot of Virginia Tech fans, Billy, that didn't know where Blacksburg was until 1999, and I think that's a telltale sign, especially in today's day and age, because Tech's not winning at halftime. Everybody's going out to the parking lot and getting drunk more. They're not sticking around in the games. And, I mean, like you said, that's a result of the team. But you've got people like from my dad's age and these older guys, they're sticking around because they remember the days when Virginia Tech wasn't very football power considered. They remember the days before Bill Dooley. They remember the days when you were playing VMI on Thanksgiving. And I think that over the years that a lot of those old Hokies have dwindled out, one, because it's difficult to get good. I mean, if you're not a big-time donor, you're not getting great seats anymore. I mean, you're having to buy on secondary markets or single-game tickets, and a middle-class person can't pay for a family of four. They can't pay $500 to go to a football game when I'm considering four seats and a parking pass. And, I mean, that's just the nature of college football. And you see with this Drive for 25 program that Virginia Tech's doing now, that Tech is behind the curve of a lot of major college programs. So it's something that has Tech's behind on, but in a lot of ways it's getting away from its original, I guess, fan base, if that makes any sense what I'm saying. And that's no fault of Virginia Tech. It's no fault of their fan base. But I think your true blue or true maroon, deep down Hokies, I think a lot of those guys have been shuffled to the back. And I'm not saying people that have came to the forefront in the last 20 years aren't true Hokies, but I'm saying your platform. I feel like a lot of your platform has been knocked out. And when you lose that platform, everybody else is trying to make up for it, if that makes any sense at all. But I think that Southwest Virginia is that platform for Virginia Tech. And I don't know if this goes to example, but you could probably easily name to me 20 kids from your high school, your rival high school, that went to Virginia Tech just from the year you graduated, maybe. As to where there wasn't very many kids from my area that went straight to Tech. I mean, I think there were 4 kids in my graduating class that went to Tech straight out of high school, and there was a couple kids from a rival high school, a couple of rival high schools, and there's just not as many down here anymore that are able to go. So I think one, two, if you don't go to Tech and you don't build that further connection, you're more likely to jump off the bandwagon, for lack of a better way to say it. So I don't know. I've thought about that a lot. Like you said, I think it's an interesting conversation to have, but I think a lot of different moving parts go through it. I think that some people that were on a baseline foundation, I don't think they can attend physically. I don't think that the football team's woes the last few years, I don't think that helps. But it's just a very interesting situation to see, and I hope that very soon we can see the corners in the south end zone and the east side full once again.
And I guess going off of that, how do we win back recruiting in the state? I mean, this is something, Brady, I mean, you see the best players in the state aren't going to Virginia Tech anymore, whereas I'm sure, in the early 2000s when Tech really was becoming a powerhouse, that wasn't the case. The best players in the state were coming to Virginia Tech. How do we do that? Because I think once we're able to do that, and I'm sure you can give your take here, once we're able to win back the state, I think that can help us sort of contend with the Clemsons, the other powerhouse schools in the ACC of Florida State. How do we go back winning back the state recruiting-wise?
I was actually reading some tweets from Dwight Vick this week. Dwight, an All Big East selection back in the late 90s, played offensive line. And he was talking about how Frank Beamer would go into Newport News and Hampton and Norfolk, and he would go in homes where parents could see him in the homes as to other coaches would come in and they would just meet at the school. He didn't want to go into the homes because there have been some, I guess, for lack of a better way to say it, some scary areas that you actually need to go into to pull kids out of to get them to come to your school. But I think Beamer also opened that up. Everybody's like, wow, this is what Frank Beamer is doing. And they're having a lot of success with these kids in the inner cities in the 757. Well, then Nick Saban, he's getting on a plane to Eastern Virginia. And so is Brian Kelly, and your Alabamas are in there, and your Clemsons are in there, and your Ohio States and Notre Dames and Michigans and so on and so forth. And you really, if you're Fuente, and you gotta hit that home, and you gotta talk about what Virginia Tech can do for you. I mean, obviously that's your biggest recruiting ploy, but nonetheless, if one big key thing that if you're I'm a recruit right now, something that it's going to hit home for me is they come in and they say you could potentially be the best player to ever come through here. I still think that that's up in the air. I mean, obviously Bruce Smith and Michael Vick, but there's not many flags hanging in the north end zone. I think that's a big selling point, staying at home, doing well in your state. I think that is very marketable. One thing that has always eaten me alive is from my end of the state, there's not been very many Division I caliber players. And however, it seems like more times than not, Virginia Tech whiffs on the guys who are in their backyard. That's like, for an example, right now, Trenton Adkins is a running back at Ridgeview High School in Dickinson County, same place. Justin Hamilton's high school consolidated with another one to make this school, and West Virginia's offered him, Tennessee's offered him, North Carolina's offered him, Virginia's offered him, but Virginia Tech hasn't. And that's just something like, with a kid like him, regardless, I mean, maybe, and obviously the coaching staff knows way more than I'll ever know, but this is just an opinion of mine. If there's a kid in your backyard with Power 5 offers from all those schools, and your defensive coordinator went to that high school, for lack of a better way to say it, why is the Hokies not offered this kid? And I mean, I don't know what's in the plans or whatever, but there's a lot of kids right now, for example, and I'm just talking Southwest Virginia. And I mean, Southwest Virginia has produced Heath Miller. It's produced Thomas Jones, Julius Jones. The late Devin Johnson at Marshall, Ahmad Bradshaw. A lot of guys that didn't go to Virginia Tech, but I mean, Arizona State came down last month and offered 4 kids. So if Arizona State's coming from the other side of the country to Southwest Virginia, then why hasn't the closest school to you geographically offered you? That's just – and I don't know if that's always been the case, because you look back in the 90s, Jake Housewright's from Gate City. He's for the Hokies. Chad Beasley, Jonas Housewright, Austin Fuller from Richlands. You've got Robbie Colley from Tazewell, Stephen Holloway from Tazewell, Justin Hamilton from Clintwood, Luke Owens from Grundy, pardon me. But there was a lot of good players from the guys from Southwest Virginia. Tech wasn't missing on those guys. And no, I'm not saying at all that Southwest Virginia is the save-all for Virginia Tech recruiting. But I've always thought for years that if you can't get your home guys you're literally closest to come, then maybe there's an issue. But nonetheless, you got to win back the state of Virginia. You can't have guys in the 804 and the 757 going to Penn State. You can't have them going to Michigan. It's just you can't have that happen. You got to win the state back. And I would love to see that happen tomorrow, because you can't have kids who have grown up their entire life bleeding Virginia Tech, loving Virginia Tech, would do anything in the world, bend over backwards, and you can't have them transferring to Penn State or even committing to Penn State. And I've seen two of those instances firsthand, but you got to win the state back, and it starts with that 757, but I'd really like to see all of it. Another example right now, he's got an offer, but Isaiah Johnson from Bluefield, just right across the line in West Virginia, he's a 4-star. He's the number 1 player in the state of West Virginia. The Hokies should be able to pick him right out, and you can make a legacy at DBU. You can be one of the best to ever play here. You're from right down the road. You can be home in an hour. But when Clemson and Alabama comes knocking, I mean, what more? The Hokies just need an edge to solidify getting those big-time recruits again.
For sure. Who would you consider as Virginia Tech's number 1 rival? I mean, I know some of these teams don't play Virginia Tech every year anymore, but take that out of the equation. Would it be a West Virginia? Would it be a Tennessee? Would it be Virginia? Obviously, given the geographical convenience. If you had to pick one, obviously take out of the consideration some of these schools may not play Tech every year. Who would you say is Tech's number 1 rival?
I would say it is Virginia because just throughout the state, you go everywhere, you see VTs, you see Vs with the Sabres. It's definitely the biggest rivalry. I mean, a lot of divided families. Brother went to Tech, sister went to Virginia, mom went to Tech, dad went to Tech, cousin went to Virginia. I mean, just a lot of stuff like that. It definitely is Tech's biggest rival, I think. And while football's been lopsided and Virginia probably holds the edge in the majority of the sports, and that might be wrong. I hope I am wrong, but it's easily Virginia. I mean, they hate Tech. Tech hates them. I'd say West Virginia is still a close 2, and I think Tennessee's up there too, because when you come down toward my neck of the woods, you don't really see very much blue and orange. You see a lot of gold and blue, and you see a lot of orange and white. And growing up, I knew way more Tennessee and West Virginia fans than I did Virginia fans. But it's Virginia, and I think that I would love to see Tech schedule a home and home with West Virginia and Tennessee every year. That's more appealing to me and probably the entire fan base than it is playing ECU or ODU. But we'll see one day. The Tennessee game was a lot of fun. We're getting ready to play West Virginia back-to-back years. Would love to see a game in Morgantown, but it's without a doubt it's still Virginia.
Brady, thank you so much for your conversation about Virginia Tech. Before I let you go, I could not let you go without talking about your other favorite football team, the New England Patriots. Of course, they made news. I don't even know when it was because obviously with this whole situation with the pandemic, it seems like, we get lost in what day it is. But Tom Brady's, after 20 years, leaves the Patriots to go to the Buccaneers. What was your reaction when it happened? And then part 2 of that question is, how do you think both teams will end up faring? Do you think the Patriots will be decent this season? Do you think the Bucs are going to go to the Super Bowl? I mean, what's your expectations for both teams this season?
Well, when I found out, I was in bed. I was getting ready for finals in my winter semester, and I woke up and I had all kinds of texts, and it was weird for me, man. I began my Patriots fandom because Mike Compton was the starting guard in 2001. He's from Richlands, and I was really good friends with his daughter growing up, and then the quarterback's last name is Brady. So what better reason to cheer for a team than your name and your hometown? But it was weird because what do you do when the reason you like a team leaves? Not just retires, but leaves. And I was hell-bent on the thought that he wasn't going anywhere, and I was wrongly mistaken. It's going to be interesting to see how him and Belichick fare without each other because they say that anybody can win in Belichick's system. We'll see how Jared Stidham does. I'll still be a Patriots fan for the rest of my life because that's just something I'm loyal to, is if you pick them when you're a kid, you got to ride with them through the lows. If you went through the highs, I know that you know exactly what I'm talking about with that T-shirt you've got on. But the Pats, I think, will be all right. I think they still may very well be the favorite in the AFC East. The Bucks are they got a pretty lethal receiving core and the best to ever do it, slinging a pigskin. So we'll see how it goes. Gronk's back. I think that the Bucks are easily the favorite in the NFC South. Maybe we could see a collision course in the Super Bowl. I think it'd be must-see television, but we got to wait and see how it plays out. Pat's really young. I don't really think they've done anything to solve their receiver issues. So how will that fare with a young quarterback who's not the greatest ever? So we'll see. I think Tom right now on paper has got the advantage, but Belichick, greatest coach ever, don't rule him out. And it'll be a lot of fun to see what happens. And like you said, I really hope we can get some sort of football season. NASCAR kind of showing some hope for us because they're allowing fans in gradually just announced last night that Bristol's getting an all-star race and 30,000 people will be there. So hopefully we start to see stadiums filling up, increasing, and we see COVID numbers decreasing. And I'm looking forward to that day because, man, the last 3 months have just been so surreal. Makes you really thankful for what we are able to do when times are normal. Because sitting in the house has not been a lot of fun unless you are working on growing a mullet or growing a full beard. So hopefully it's all back to normal soon, my man.
For sure. And of course, Brady's a fascinating guy. So much we didn't get to talk to about. You mentioned you're a Braves fan. I almost don't feel bad. I'm all right with you being a Patriots fan just because you've been a long-suffering fan of Tech and the Braves, and even the Lakers had a few tough years recently until LeBron came. So I definitely don't blame you for you're definitely not a bandwagon. I do want to say that Brady's got his reasons for being a Patriots fan, and even more respect that he's sticking with them despite Tom Brady leaving. But Brady, thanks so much for joining us. I mean, we had a chance to discuss mostly Virginia Tech, but it didn't necessarily have to be about what was on the football field. We got into some interesting conversations revolving fan engagement and some all-time games you've been to, and how to win back recruiting in the state. So hopefully, whoever, Justin Fuente, if you watch this video, Brady Hess just gave you the blueprint to get back to success. But Brady, thank you so much for joining us. Can't tell you how much I appreciate it.
I appreciate it, Billy. Always good to catch up with you, and hopefully we'll get to do it again soon, buddy.
For sure. So once again, for my guest, Brady Hess, I am Billy Parvatam. Thank you so much for joining us on the latest edition of The Pulse with BP. We'll see you next time. Again, this has been the latest edition of The Pulse with BP. Thank you so much.